Okay, just to recollect where we are. Beowulf and his Geat warriors have come across the sea to help Hrothgar, and they are now awaiting Grendel's arrival in Heorot, the great hall of the Danes. Beowulf has just made a boasting speech saying that he'll fight Grendel without armour and without weaponry. Then the hero lay down, leant his head on the bolster there. About him many brave sea warriors bowed to their hall rest. Not one of them thought he would thence be departing ever to set eyes on his own country, the home that nourished him, or its noble people, for they had heard how many men of the Danes' death had dragged from that drinking hall. But God was to grant to the Geat people the clue to war success in the web of fate, his help and support, so that they did overcome the foe through the force of one unweaponed man. The Almighty Lord has ruled the affairs of the race of men thus from the beginning. Gliding through the shadows came the walker in the night. The warriors slept whose task was to hold the horned building, all except one. It was well known to men that the demon could not drag them to the shades without God's willing it. Yet the one man kept unblinking watch. He awaited, heart swelling with anger against his foe, the ordeal of battle. Down off the moorlands, misting fells, came Grendel stalking. God's brand was on him. The spoiler meant to snatch away from the high hall some of human race. He came on under the clouds, clearly saw at last the gold hall of men, the mead drinking place nailed with gold plates. That was not the first visit he had paid to the hall of Hrothgar the Dane. He never before and never after harder luck nor hall guards found. Walking to the hall came this warlike creature, condemned to agony. The door gave way, toughened with iron at the touch of those hands. Rage enflamed, wreckage bent, he ripped open the jaws of the hall. Hastening on, the foes then stepped onto the unstained floor, angrily advanced. Out of his eyes stood an unlovely light like that of fire. He saw then in the hall a host of young soldiers, a company of kinsmen caught away in sleep, a whole warrior band. In his heart he laughed then, horrible monster, his hopes swelling to a gluttonous meal. He meant to wrench the life from each body that lay in the place before night was done. It was not to be. He was no longer to feast on the flesh of mankind after that night. Narrowly the powerful kinsman of Hygelac kept watch how the ravager set to work with his sudden catches. Nor did the monster mean to hang back. As a first step, he set his hands on a sleeping soldier, savagely tore at him, gnashed at his bone joints, bolted huge gobbets, sucked at his veins, and had soon eaten all of the dead man, even down to his hands and feet. Forward he stepped, stretched out his hands to seize the warrior calmly at rest there, reached out for him with his unfriendly fingers, but the faster man, forestalling, sat up, sent back his arm. The upholder of evils at once knew he had not met on Middle's earth extremest acres with any man of harder hand grip. His heart panicked. He was quit of the place no more quickly for that. Eager to be away, he ailed for his darkness and the company of devils. The dealings he had there were like nothing he had come across in his lifetime. Then Higelac's brave kinsman called to mind that evening's utterance. Upright he stood, fastened his hold till fingers were bursting. The monster strained away. The man stepped closer. The monster's desire was for darkness between them, direction regardless, to get out and run for his fen-bordered lair. He felt his grip strength crushed by his enemy. It was an ill journey the rough marauder made to Heorot. The crash of the banqueting hall came to the Danes, the men of the guard that remained in the buildings with the taste of death. The deepening rage of the claimants to Heorot caused it to resound. It was indeed wonderful that the wine supper hall withstood the wrestling pair. The world's palace fell not to the ground. But it was girt firmly, both inside and out, by iron braces of skilled manufacture. Many a figured gold-worked wine bench, as we heard it, started from the floor at the struggles of that pair. The men of the Danes had not imagined that any of mankind, by what method soever, might undo that intricate antlered hall, sunder it by strength, unless it was swallowed up in the embraces of fire. Fear entered into the listening North Danes as that noise rose up again, strange and strident. It shrilled terror to the ears that heard it. Through the hall's side wall, the grisly plaint of God's enemy, his song of ill success, the sobs of the damned one bewailing his pain. He was pinioned there by the man of all mankind living in this world's estate, the strongest of his hands. Not for anything would the Earl's guardian let his deadly guest go living. He did not count his continued existence of the least use to anyone. The Earls ran to defend the person of their famous prince. They drew their ancestral swords to bring what aid they could to their captain Beowulf. They were ignorant of this when they entered the fight, boldly intentioned battle friends to hew at Grendel, hunt his life on every side, that no sword on earth, not the truest steel, could touch their assailant. For by a spell he had dispossessed all blades of their bite on him. A bitter parting from life was that day destined for him. The eldritch spirit was sent off on his far faring into the fiend's domain. It was then that this monster, who, moved by spite against humankind, had caused so much harm, so feuding with God, found at last that flesh and bone were to fail him in the end. For Higelac's great-hearted kinsman had him by the hand, and hateful to each was the breath of the other. A breach in the giant flesh frame showed then. Shoulder muscles sprang apart. There was a snapping of tendons. Bone locks burst. To Beowulf the glory of this fight was granted. Grendel's lot to flee the slopes fenward with flagging heart, to a den where he knew there could be no relief, no refuge for life at its very last stage, whose surrender day had dawned. The Danish hopes in this fatal fight had found their answer. He had cleansed Heorot. He who had come from afar, deep-minded, strong-hearted, had saved the hall from persecution. He was pleased with his night's work, the deed he had done. Before the Danish people, the Geat captain had made good his boast, had taken away all their unhappiness, the evil menace under which they had lived, enduring it by dire constraint, no slight affliction. As a signal to all, the hero hung up the hand, the arm and torn-off shoulder, the entire limb, Grendel's whole grip below the gable of the roof. There was, as I heard it, at hall next morning a great gathering in the gift hall yard to see the wonder. All along the wide high roads The chiefs of the clans came from far and near to see the foe's footprints. It may fairly be said that his parting from life aroused no pity in any who tracked the spore blood of his blind flight for the monster's mere pool. With mood flagging and strength crushed, he had staggered onwards. Each step evidenced his ebbing life's blood. The tarn was troubled. A terrible wave thrash brimmed it, bubbling, black mingled. The warm wound blood welled upwards. He had dived to his doom. He had died miserably. Here in his fen lair he had laid aside his heathen soul. Hell welcomed it. Then the old retainers turned back on the way, journeyed with much joy, joined by the young men. The warriors on white horses wheeled away from the mere in bold mood. Beowulf's feat was much spoken of, and many said that between the seas, south or north, over earth stretched no other man beneath the sky's shifting excelled Beowulf. Of all who wielded the sword, he was the worthiest to rule. In saying this, they did not slight in the least the gracious Hrothgar, for he was a good king. Where as they went, their way broadened, they would match their mounts, making them leap alongside the best stretchers, the strife eager on their fallow horses. Or a fellow of the king's, whose head was a storehouse of the storied verse, whose tongue gave gold to the language of the treasured repertory, wrought a new lay made in the measure. The man struck up, found the new phrase, framed rightly the deed of Beowulf, drove the tale, rang word changes. Of Wales' great son, Sigmund, he spoke then, spelling out to them all he had heard of that hero's strife, his fights, his strange feats, far wanderings, the feuds and the blood spilt. Fitela alone heard these things, not well nor widely known to men, when Sigmund chose to speak in this vein to his sister's son. They were inseparable in every fight, the firmest of allies. Their swords had between them scythed to the ground a whole race of monsters. The reputation that spread at his death was no slight one. Sigmund it was who had slain the dragon, the keeper of the hoard. The king's son walked under the grey rock. He risked alone that fearful conflict. Fitela was not there. Yet it turned out well for him. His weapon transfixed, the marvellous snake, struck in the cave wall, best of swords. The serpent was dead. Sigmund's valour had so prevailed that the whole ring hoard was his to enjoy, dispose of as he wished. Wales' great son loaded his ship with shining trophies, stacking them to the mast. The monster shrivelled away. He was by far the most famous of adventurers among the peoples, this protector of warriors, for the deeds by which he had distinguished himself. Hermod's stature and strength had decayed then, his daring diminished. Deeply betrayed into the fiend's power, far among the giants he was done to death. Dark sorrows drove him mad at last. A deadly grief he had become to his people and the princes of his land. Wise men among the leaders had lamented that career, their fierce one's fall, who in former days had looked to him for relief of their ills, hoping that their lord's son would live and in ripeness assume the kingdom, the care of his people, the hoard and the stronghold, the storehouse of heroes, the Scylding homeland. Whereas Higlac's kinsman endeared himself ever more deeply to his friends and to all mankind. Evil seized Hermod. The riders returning came racing their horse along dusty pale roads. The dawn had grown into broadest day, and, drawn by their eagerness to see the strange sight, there had assembled at the hall many keen warriors. The king himself, esteemed for excellence, stepped glorious from his wife's chambers, the warden of ring-hoards, with much company, and his queen walked the mead path by him, her maidens following. Taking his stand on the steps of the hall, Hrothgar beheld the hand of Grendel below the gold gable end, and gave speech. Let swift thanks be given to the governor of all, seeing this sight. I have suffered 1,000 spites from Grendel, but God works ever miracle upon miracle, the Master of Heaven. Until yesterday I doubted whether our afflictions would find a remedy in my lifetime, since this loveliest of halls stood slaughter-painted, spattered with blood. For all my counsellors this was a cruel sorrow, for none of them imagined they could mount a defence of the Scylding stronghold against such enemies, warlocks, demons. But one man has, by the Lord's power, performed the thing that all our thought and arts to this day had failed to do. She may indeed say, whoever she be that brought into the world this young man here, if she yet lives, that the God of old was gracious to her in her childbearing. Beowulf, I now take you to my bosom as a son, O best of men, and cherish you in my heart. Hold yourself well in this new relation. You will lack for nothing that lies in my gift of the goods of this world. Lesser officers have elicited reward. We have honoured from our horde less heroic men, far weaker in war. But you have well ensured by the deeds of your hands an undying honour for your name forever. May the Almighty Father yield you always the success that yesternight you enjoyed. Beowulf spoke, son of Ecgtheow. We willingly undertook this test of courage, risked a match with the might of the stranger, and performed it all. I would prefer, though, that you had rather seen the rest of him here, the whole length of him lying here dead. I had meant to catch him, clamp him down with a cruel lock to his last resting place, with my hands upon him. I would have him soon in the throes of death, unless he disappeared. But I had not a good enough grip to prevent his getting away, when God did not wish it. The fiend in his flight was too far violent, my life's enemy. But he left his hand behind here, so as to have his life, and his arm and shoulder, and all for nothing it brought him no respite, wretched creature. He lives no longer, laden with sins to plague mankind. Pain has set heavy hands on him, and cast about him fatal fetters. He is forced to await now, like a guilty criminal, a greater judgment, where the Lord in his splendour shall pass sentence upon him. The son of Ecgtheow was more silent then in boasting of his own battle deeds. The aethelings gazed at what the earl's strength had hung there, the hand, high up under the roof, and the fingers of their foe. From the front, each one of the socketed nails seemed steel to the eye, each spur on the hand of that heathen warrior a terrible talon. They told each other nothing could be hard enough to harm it at all. Not the most ancient of iron swords would bite on that bloody battle hand. Other hands were pressed then to prepare the inside of the banqueting hall, and briskly too. Many were ready, both men and women, to adorn the guest hall. Gold-embroidered tapestries glowed from the walls, and wonderful sights for every creature that cared to look at them. The bright building had badly started in all its inner parts, despite its iron bands, and the hinges were ripped off. Only the roof survived unmarred, and in one piece, when the monstrous one, flecked with his crimes, had fled the place in despair of his life. But to elude death is not easy. Attempt it who will, he shall go to the place prepared for each of the sons of men. The soul-bearers dwelling on earth ordained them by fate, laid fast in that bed. The body shall sleep when the feast is done. In due season, the king himself came to the hall. Halfdine's son would sit at the banquet. No people has gathered in greater retinue, borne themselves better about their ring-giver. Men known for their courage came to the benches, rejoiced in the feast. They refreshed themselves kindly with many a mead cup. In their midst the brave kinsman, father's brother and brother's son, Hrothgar and Hrothulf. Heorot's floor was filled with friends. Falsity in those days had no place in the dealings of the Danish people. Then, as a sign of victory, the son of Halfdine bestowed on Beowulf a standard worked in gold, a figured battle banner, breast and head armour, and many admired the marvellous sword that was borne before the hero. Beowulf drank with the company of the hall. He had no cause to be ashamed of gifts so fine before the fighting men. I have not heard that many men at arms have given 4 such gifts of treasure more openly to another at the mead. At the crown of the helmet, the head protector, was a rim with a wire around it to stop the file-hardened blade that fights to have tempered from shattering it, when the shield warrior must go out against grim enemies. The king then ordered 8 war horses with glancing bridles to be brought within the halls and onto the floor. Fretted with gold and studded with stones was one saddle there. This was the battle seat of the bulwark of the Danes, when in the sword play the son of Halfdine would take his part. The prowess of the king had never failed at the front where the fighting was mortal. The protector of the sons of Scyld then gave both to Beowulf, bidding him take care to use them well, both weapons and horses. Thus did the glorious prince, guardian of the treasure, reward these deeds with both war horses and armour. Of such open-handedness no honest man could ever speak in disparagement. Then the Lord of Men also made a gift of treasure to each who had adventured with Beowulf over the sea's paths, seated now at the benches, an old thing of beauty. He bade compensation to be made, too, in gold, for the man whom Grendel had horribly murdered. More would have gone had not the god overseeing us and the resolve of a man stood against that weird. The wielder guided then the dealings of mankind, as he does even now. A mind that seeks to understand and grasp this is therefore best. Both bad and good, and much of both, must be born in a lifetime spent on this earth in these anxious days. Then string and song sounded together before Halfdine's helper in battle. The lute was taken up and tales recited when Hrothgar's bard was bidden to sing a hall song for the men on the mead benches. It was how disaster came to the sons of Finn. First the Halfdine champion, Hneif of the Scyldings, was fated to fall in the Frisian ambush. Hildberg, their lady, had little cause to speak of the good faith of the Jutes. Guiltless she had suffered on that Lindenwood clash the loss of her closest ones, her son and her brother, both born to die there, struck down by the spear. Sorrowful princess. This decree of fate the daughter of Hoc mourned with good reason, for when morning came the clearness of heaven disclosed to her the murder of those kindred who were the cause of all her earthly bliss. Battle had also claimed all but a few of Finn's retainers. in that place of assembly. He was unable, therefore, to bring to a finish the fight with Hengist, force out and crush the few survivors of Hanif's troop. The truce terms they put to him were that he should make over a mead hall to the Danes, with high seat and floor, half of it to be held by them, half by the Jutes. In sharing out goods, that the son of Folkwalda should every day give honour to the Danes of Hengist's party, providing rings and prizes from the hoard, plated with gold, treating them identically in the drinking hall as when he chose to cheer his own Frisians. On both sides they then bound themselves fast in the pact of friendship. Finn then swore strong, unexceptioned oaths to Hengist to hold in honour, as advised by his counsellors, the battle survivors. Similarly, no man by word or deed to undo the pact, as by mischievous cunning to make complaint of it, despite that they were serving the slayer of their prince, since their lordless state so constrained them to do. But that if any Frisian should fetch the feud to mind, and by taunting words awaken the bad blood, it should be for the sword's edge to settle it then. The pyre was erected, the ruddy gold brought from the hoard, and the best warrior of Skilding race was ready for the burning. Displayed on his pyre, plain to see, were the bloody mail shirt, the boars on the helmets, iron-hard, gold-clad, and gallant men about him, all marred by their wounds. Mighty men had fallen there. Hildburg then ordered her own son to be given to the funeral fire of Hnaf for the burning of his bones, bade him be laid at his uncle's side. She sang the dirges, bewailed her grief. The warrior went up, the greatest of corpse files, coiled into the sky, roared before the mounds. There were melting heads and bursting wounds, as the blood sprang out from weapon-bidden bodies. Blazing fire, most insatiable of spirits, swallowed the remains of the victims of both nations. Their valour was no more. The warriors then scattered and went to their homes, missing their comrades, for they made for Friesland, the home and high stronghold. But Hengist still, as he was constrained to do, stayed with Finn a death-darkened winter in dreams of his homeland. He was prevented from passage of the sea in his ring-beaked boat. The boiling ocean fought with the wind. Winter locked the sea in his icy binding, until another year came at last to the dwellings, as it does still, continually keeping its season, the weather of rainbows. Now winter had fled, and the earth's breast was fair. The exile strained to leave these lodgings, yet it was less the voyage that exercised his mind than the means of his vengeance, the bringing about of the bitter conflict that he meditated for the men of the Jutes. So he did not decline the accustomed remedy, when the son of Hunlaf set across his knees that best of blades, his battle-gleaming sword. The Jutes were acquainted with the edges of that steel. And so, in his hall, at the hands of his enemies, Finn received the fatal sword thrust. Guthlaf and Oslaf, after the sea crossing, proclaimed their tribulations, their treacherous entertainment, and named the author of them. Anger in the breast rose irresistible. Red was the hall then with the lives of foemen. Finn was slain there, the king among his troop, and the queen taken. The Skilding crewmen carried to the ship the hall furnishings of Friesland's king, all they could find at Finnsburg, in gemstones and jewel work. Journeying back, they returned to the Danes. Their true-born lady restored her to her people. Thus the story was sung, the gleeman's lay. Gladness mounted, bench mirth rang out. The bearers gave wine from wonderful vessels. Then came Wealhtheow forward, going with golden crown to where the great heroes were sitting, uncle and nephew. Their bond was sound at that time. Each was true to the other. Likewise, Unferth the spokesman sat at the footstool of Hrothgar. All had faith in his spirit, accounted his courage great, though towards his kinsman he had not been kind at the clash of swords. The Scylding queen then spoke. Accept this cup, my king and lord, giver of treasure. Let your gaiety be shown, gold friend of warriors, and to the Geats speak in words of friendship, for this well becomes a man. Be gracious to these Geats, and let the gifts you have had from near and far not be forgotten now. I hear it is your wish to hold this warrior henceforward as your son. Heorot is cleansed, the ring hall bright again. Therefore bestow while you may these blessings liberally, and leave to your kinsman the land and its people when your passing is decreed, your meeting with fate. For may I not count on my gracious Hrothulf to guard honourably our young ones here, if you, my lord, should give over this world earlier than he? I am sure that he will show to our children answerable kindness, if he keeps in remembrance all that we have done to indulge and advance him, the honours we bestowed on him when he was still a child. She then turned to the bench where her boys were sitting, Hrethric and Hrothmund among the heroes' sons, young men together, where the good man sat also between the two brothers, Beowulf the Geat. Then the cup was taken to him, and he was entreated kindly to honour their feast. Ornate gold was presented in trophy, 2 arm wreaths, with robes and rings also, and the richest collar I have ever heard of in all the world. Never under heaven have I heard of a finer prize among heroes. Since Hamar carried off the brizzing necklace to his bright city, that gold-cased jewel, he gave the slip to machinations of Eärmonic, and made his name forever. This gold was to be on the neck of the grandson of Swerting on the last of his harryings, Hygelac the Geat, as he stood before the standard astride his plunder, defending his war hall. Weird struck him down. In his superb pride he provoked disaster in the Frisian feud. This fabled collar the great war king wore when he crossed the foaming waters. He fell beneath his shield. The king's person passed into Frankish hands, together with his corslet, and this collar also. They were lesser men that looted the slain, for when the carnage was over, the corpse field was littered with the people of the Geats. Applause filled the hall. Then Wealhtheow spoke, and her words were attended. Take pride in this jewel. Have joy of this mantle, drawn from our treasuries, most dear Beowulf. May fortune come with them, and may you flourish in your youth. Proclaim your strength. But in counsel to these boys, be a gentle guardian, and my gratitude will be seen. Already you have so managed that men everywhere will hold you in honour for all time, even to the cliffs at world's end, washed by ocean, the wind's range. All the rest of your life must be happy, Prince, and prosperity I wish to you, too. Abundance of treasure. But be to my son a friend indeed, most favoured of men. You see how open is each earl here with his neighbour, temperate of heart and true to his lord. The nobles are loyal, the lesser people dutiful. Wine mellows the men to move to my bidding. She walked back to her place. What a banquet that was! The men drank their wine, the weird they did not know, destined from old, the doom that was to fall on many of the earls there. When evening came, Hrothgar departed to his private bower, the king to his couch. Countless were the men who watched over the hall, as they had often done before. They cleared away the benches and covered the floor with beds and bolsters. The best of the feast, bent to his hall rest, hurried to his doom, each by his head, his polished shield, the lindens of battle. On the benches aloft, above each atheling, easily to be seen, were the ring-stitched mail-coat, the mighty helmet, steepling above the fray, and the stout spear shaft. It was their habit always, at home or on campaign, to be ready for war, in whichever case, whatsoever the hour might be, that the need came on their lord. What a nation they were! Then they sank into sleep. A savage penalty one paid for his night's rest. It was no new thing for that people, since Grendel had occupied the gold-giving hall, working his evil, until the end came, death for his misdeeds. It was declared then to men, and received by every year, that for all this time a survivor had been living, an avenger for their foe, and his grim life's leaving. Grendel's mother, herself a monstrous ogress, was ailing for her loss. She had been doomed to dwell in the dread waters, in the chilling currents, because of that blow whereby Cain became the killer of his brother, his own father's son. He stole away branded, marked for his murder, from all that men delight in, to inhabit the wastelands. Hosts of the ill ones sprang from his begetting, as Grendel, that hateful, accursed outcast, who encountered at Heorot a watchful man waiting for the fight. The grim one fastened his grip upon him there, but he remembered his mighty strength, the gift that the Lord had so largely bestowed on him, and putting his faith in the favour of the Almighty and his aid and comfort, he overcame the foe and put down the hell-fiend. How humbling was that flight, when the miserable outcast crept to his dying place, thus mankind's enemy. But his mother now purposed to set out at last, savage in her grief, on that wrath-bearing visit of vengeance for her son. Call it a day there.